What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here.
Back with an Ed puzzle. Today we're going to learn about the gunpowder empires.
If you have any questions at the end of the video, make sure to jot them down and let me know in class.
What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to unit number 4, 1450 to 1750. This is on the gunpowder empires. This is on East Asia, which consists in this case for China and Japan, as well as Russia. And Russia's kind of a weird thing because part of it's in Europe, part of it's in Asia. So we're just going to call it Russia here. So we got 3 different empires we're going to talk about. We had 3 different empires last time with the Ottoman, the Safavid, the Mughals. These 3 today are going on at the same time. We got all these different things happening around the world. Let's get going. Let's get started. Here's the deal. In China, during this time period of 1450 to 1750, there's kind of a weird break. So we have 2 different empires in China during this period. The first one that we had was a continuity from the last time period, and this is something we'd call synthesis. So a little synthesis here on the last time period. We had the Ming Dynasty, and if you remember, going back even further than that, the Ming Dynasty overthrew the Mongol dynasty, which was called the Yuan, Y-U-A-N dynasty, and the Ming Dynasty took over. And the Ming Dynasty had these voyages with Zheng He, aka Zheng He, and they went out and they explored and they created the tributary states and all this stuff. Here's the problem with the Ming Dynasty, and here's what happens, and here's what issue the Ming runs into. If you remember, the one thing that makes the world economy at this point, the global economy, go around is silver. And the Chinese like their silver. And it's, for years, like, the Chinese have been really kind of reclusive and isolated. And now they have all this silver coming from the gold, or the silver mines in Japan and the silver mines in Latin America. And they flood into China, and as a result of all this, it leads to huge inflation in China. And this inflation means that with all this silver coming in, silver comes in, silver comes in, silver comes in, more people have access to silver. And if more people have silver in their pocket, what happens to the price of goods of things? It goes up. And when that price of goods goes up, it's called inflation. Your parents or somebody in your family might be like, oh, when I was growing up, a movie cost $2. Ha ha ha. That's inflation. Same movie, same experience, now costs $11 instead of $2. Or, you used to be able to buy a Coke for 50 cents and now you can't. That's inflation. And this happens in China, but it happens to everything. And that combined with corruption in the bureaucracy and Confucian civil service and people paying their taxes leads to the decline of the Ming. The Ming are weak. And when they are weak, a new group comes in to overthrow the Ming. And they are from up here in what is now northern China, but is at this point was outside of the boundaries of the Ming Dynasty, which is called Manchuria. The people who live up here are called Manchus. They live in Manchuria. And the Manchus are not Chinese. They are not Chinese. The Manchus are not Chinese. So we have, for the second time in history of China, they are going to be overthrown and taken over by a non-Chinese group. The first time was, you got it, the Mongols. So here's the deal. They are going to expand when the Qing take over, which is they're going to take a Chinese name. Qing is pronounced Qing, like C-H-I-N-G. So the Ming are overthrown. The Qing take over, and they are going to start expanding. Guess what they have access to? If you forgot, right here, gunpowder. And if you have access to gunpowder and guns, you can easily expand. So what they're going to do is they're going to start expanding. And they basically create a country or an empire that is essentially what is the borders of China today. Here's the deal with how they ruled. They're going to use some ideas from the previous time periods. A little synthesis / a little continuity from the previous time periods. When they don't want to do what the Mongols did. The Mongols came in and they separated the Chinese and the Mongols. They put the Confucian civil scholars, if I can say that, the Confucian scholars who passed the civil service exam at the bottom. So they want to improve the legitimacy. They want to make people believe that, yeah, you should be the ruler. We're down with you. We like what you're talking about. So they keep a lot of old Chinese ideas. They keep the Confucian ideas of the mandate of heaven. They keep the idea of the Confucian scholars, and they keep them in the same position that they were in before. So Confucian civil service scholars, why do I have so much trouble saying that today, are like, yes, we are totally down with you. Also, they keep pretty much the same social pyramid as we've had in China for years with merchants at the bottom, except now we're going to put the Manchus at the top. Okay, we got it. They also are going to help end corruption. This improves their legitimacy. People don't want a corrupt government. They want a government that they can believe in and trust. In order to promote and end corruption, they make the civil service exam more fair, and they make it harder to cheat because people had been cheating on the civil service exam forever because people cheat on tests. Also, Manchus are 2% of the population. You would imagine that the Chinese would be like, get out of here, we don't want you. But all of these things are going to improve their legitimacy. Also, there's an economic boom in China. And when things are good, people support their government. This is a theme throughout all of history, and including places like the United States today, where if the economy is doing well, generally there's support for the leaders. They're not going to keep everything like it was. There are some changes. So we have continuities here. And here are some changes. One, they're going to ban intermarriage between the Manchus and the Chinese. So you can't marry. The Manchus are scared that if there's marriage between the Manchus and the Chinese, that the Chinese culture is so strong that it will kind of gobble up Manchu culture. So we're going to keep them separated. Also, they do something called the literacy inquisition. Inquisition is like questioning. And anything that is anti-Qing, any book that's published, any poems, any plays, we're going to squash it. And they're going to go around, they're going to arrest people who write these books, they're going to burn these books. So if there's any books that are anti-Qing, they're going to get rid of them. The last thing they do is they're going to force men to wear the typical Manchu style. And this was the style in the Ming Dynasty. This is like the typical old school Chinese style. And this is going to be the Qing style. There's something called a Q. You have this shaved head on top and this long ponytail that comes down, kind of like a half mullet. And then you take your half mullet that's long and you braid it into kind of like a French braid. And that's called a Q. That's a Manchu hairstyle, but they're going to force the Chinese to wear it as a sign of submission. Also, we're going to have a lot of interaction. Remember, this is the age of exploration. Europeans are coming around into China, still trading. They're trying to get goods. They're trying to get Chinese products. They are going to allow European merchants and Christian missionaries to enter China, but they're going to be isolated. Instead of having free reign of the country, they're usually kept in city areas in a certain isolated area. So for example, maybe there's like a 5-block radius in Chang'an that the Christian European merchants and missionaries are allowed to trade in. So if you exit and you go outside of that 5-block radius, you're subject to arrest. So these barbarians, these European barbarians, are allowed in certain areas. Also, the Qing are going to use some Western advances. The West is going through, and when I say West, I mean Western Europe, is going through some scientific revolution during this period. So they're learning more laws of like gravity, and they're learning certain, they're coming up with new inventions. They're learning medical diagnosis. They're understanding the body. And those ideas are going to come into China. And the Chinese are somewhat accepting of these ideas to learn from. Same time as the Qing. We also have in Japan, which is also East Asia, we have this new government that's going to take over called the Tokugawa Shogunate, or Tokugawa Japan. And it looks, for the most part, most of these areas that you see that are not in green are going to be areas under the Tokugawa control, and then the green are going to be areas that have some control by the Tokugawa. So here's the deal. Japan, before the Tokugawa, was decentralized. There was feudalism, kind of like feudalism that we talked about in Europe and we talked about in Japan last time period. Here's your synthesis. Gosh, I'm so good at a little synthesis or contextualization here. A lot of contextualization here. So here's the deal. It's decentralized. Feudalism wasn't working. There's these large nobles, which is one of the problems with feudalism, start fighting over power and land. And there's this period of war going on in Japan. One of the top nobles, named Tokugawa Ieyasu, is going to set up he's going to take over kind of the other daimyos, bring peace, and he's going to set up what is called the shogunate. A shogunate is just a fancy word for a military dictatorship. And the Tokugawa family is going to put themselves on top of this shogunate. And they're going to try and create peace. What they do and how they rule, and again, here's the thing. Economic success brings legitimacy. Economic success brings legitimacy. Economic success brings legitimacy. They're going to keep the same social class. Social class stays the same. You have an emperor on the top. He has no power. He's just a figurehead. You got the shogun who's going to become the ruler. Then you got the daimyos and the samurais. And you got the peasants and artisans. And then the merchants at the bottom. Very similar to China, by the way. This merchant class is going to increase. Now, they're still at the bottom socially, but they do make money. And they're going to make a lot of money during this time. It's going to lead to an increase in arts and architecture and literature during this period. You might have heard things like kabuki, the kabuki theater in Japan, or haiku is going to become popular during this time, and other art and literature. We do have ideas coming in from China. Neo-Confucianism is pushing its way into Japan, and a lot of people in Japan, a lot of the government officials are going to try and use Confucian ideas to focus on education. So with education comes an increase in art and literature. Also, the merchants are going to lead to pay for those art and literature ideas, which is going to lead to a boom in that. Here's the issue, kind of one side note, is there aren't a lot of wars. We're bringing peace. We're ending this feudal daimyo issues. So as a result, the samurais don't really have much to do. And the samurais are going to become bureaucrats. So instead of training, they're going to train and as warriors, but then they're eventually going to get with their training comes education, and they're going to work for the government. So they get this whole samurai class with nothing to do because there's no one to fight, and they become bureaucrats. The Japanese, one kind of thing under the Tokugawa, they kick out, unlike the Chinese, they kick out all of the Europeans and they kill anyone who is a Christian, who converted to Christianity from the original European settlers in Japan. Most are going to be murdered. There's one exception. They do allow some Dutch merchants to kind of enter the country under the control of the Tokugawa Shogunate, but pretty much they're going to isolate themselves from the rest of the world. One last place is Russia. A little contextualization on Russia. Contextualization is everywhere. Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Remember, it came in the last time period of Russia. The Byzantine Empire came up into Russia, helped spread language, helped spread religion. And that the Mongols had invaded Russia. The Russians referred to the Mongols as the people from hell. And they're going to the Mongols are going to rule from the 1200s to pretty much 1480, give or take, in Russia. Here's the deal and how the Russian Empire is going to kick out the Mongols. There's a point where this guy, Ivan the Great, remember, if you have the name the Great or the Magnificent, you're pretty important right here. He's going to stop paying the Mongol tribute. The Mongols are weak at one point in the late 1400s, and this guy sees it, and he's like, we're done paying. What are you going to do about it? And the Mongols are kind of like, nothing. We're kind of weak, so we can't do anything. So the Russians take back control of their government. After years of looking east, so here's the Russian Empire. After years of looking east towards the Mongols, they're going to start looking west. And this is going to be one of the changes that we see in Russia. Russia realizes that they are behind. They're not involved in the age of exploration. The Europeans are in a better shape than them, so they need to do something about it. And there is this pattern in Russian history, which we start seeing here, of autocratic rulers. Auto means one, and these are rulers who have almost absolute or total power. Two big figures. They're part of this dynasty and part of this Russian dynasty called the Romanov. That's their family name. They're going to rule for almost over 300 years. And the two figures are Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, and they are both great, which means they're really important people. Here's what they're going to do. You want to consolidate your power. You want to take power away from your enemies and anyone who can overthrow you, and you want to bring it into your hands. And the people who have power in Russia are the nobles and the church. So they're going to attempt to reduce that power. Peter the Great actually makes himself the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church in Russia. He gets rid of what's called the patriarch, and he becomes the leader. Also, we reduce the power of the nobles. They realize they're behind, like I said, so instead of looking this way, they start looking this way, and they start making their cities like Paris, like London, like some of the cities in Western Europe, so they can imitate them. They start dressing like them. They use their art. They use their architecture. One thing in Russia is a lot of people back in the Mongol period wore these big, long, bushy beards, kind of like this right here. Peter the Great says, off with them. We're going to cut off the beard. He actually puts a beard tax. How sacrilegious. If you have a beard, you have to pay an extra tax. So his people go around and basically cut people's beards off because they want them to look more European. They do continue serfdom, so we have feudalism still exists to a certain degree, and serfdom exists in Russia. But Russia is going to expand under Peter and Catherine the Great, and they are going to seek out what we call warm water ports. If you're a boater, you know you can't put your water in cold, icy water in the wintertime. Most of this is icy cold water. So Russia is expanding during this period to get these warm water ports, which is why Russia is so huge today. 12 time zones. Oh my gosh, that's huge. And that's what we got here, okay? That's the game plan. That's the deal. We got 3 this time. We had 3 last time. That's 6 gunpowder empires. And that's not including France and Britain and the Dutch and the Spanish. All those empires going at the same time. Lots happening. Lots going on. Any questions? As always,